Hello and welcome to my tutorial on Dromed 2 1.19. Today I'm going to show you a more in-depth look at Dromed. So I want to talk about the new open template. So in the original Dromed 1.18 there was only file new or open. There was no open template. Now there's a new option called open template, and this basically opens up a mission file pre-created, but you can also modify this if you don't like it or you want to add something to it. It's called start.mis. So typically when you start up Dromed, you will start with this blank area. Now Dromed uses an additive interface. Basically what that means is that you have a huge void and you're going to add brushes into the void. So when you first start out, there's one little brush called an airbrush that's already been made. However, there is no other objects in the scene, and this means that you must add everything yourself. Now with the template, you could set certain important things and load that template next time you start Dromed instead of having to start completely from scratch. So let me go ahead and open the template. So here's my template. I've got a default airbrush room here and a room brush around that, and then I have the starting point. The starting point is basically what tells Dromed that this is where you want Garrett to start when you play the game. So basically the starting point is a marker, the class marker, in the object hierarchy, and it's been renamed starting point so it's easily findable, so it's easily found. And of course you can also search for it using the number 4 if you remember the number. Otherwise, if you remember starting point, you can type that in. So let's open this up and see what it's got. So as you can see, it inherits its properties from marker, which is just a basic shape. It's invisible while you're in game, so you won't ever see what a marker looks like. There's no object, there's no physical model associated with the marker. Now you'll notice here that the starting point has one link to player factory Garrett, -2099. So basically what this does is this associates Garrett with the marker and sets it up so that when you start the game, Garrett will have his light gem and health shields. If you do not do this, then the game cannot set up difficulty levels, for example, or show you the health shields or the gem. So without this, you basically have a camera, a walking camera, and you can't die. So you want to make sure that you create a starting point when you're making your mission. Now, as I said before, you can set a template, and so since I've already got all of this set up, now next time when I start Dromed, I can just go in here. So let me go back to new. So here's new. So I can just go here and open up that template again. And there's the same thing over again. Already has the starting point set up. So let me talk a little bit about brushes. So within the Dromed void, within the space of the scene, you will be using what are called brushes, and brushes basically set things up like rooms or sound or area brushes, which are other types of brushes. But let's focus on setting up air brushes and solid brushes. So the currently selected object, or the currently selected brush here, is an airbrush, and you'll see if you look at the bottom in the center, you'll see OP and then fill air. So basically that sets up the fill air, or in other words, you have a brush that you want to fill with empty space, so there won't be anything inside it. So it's basically a hollow room. Now what if I want a solid brush? Well, then I have to click one of these arrows and scroll through until I get solid brush. So fill solid. There we go. And so now I've just made a solid block, or a solid brush. Now right below that is the texture settings. So what face are you selected on? If you keep it on default, that basically changes all sides of the brush to whatever texture that you have currently selected. Right now this room does not have any any texture associated with it other than the default Jorge or George or George or however you want to call it. That's the original texture whenever you don't have any other textures on a brush. And right below that is texture. So this basically allows you to set what texture you want associated with that room brush. So I can scroll through it like this. Now you'll notice it only has two textures, 0 and 249. This is because this current mission file does not have any texture palettes set up. So in other words, we have not set up any new textures to be used in this scene. Now let's go back to face real quick. So you can see here I can scroll through and it will pick what face I want to put a texture on. And you'll notice in the 3D view here it highlights that face, which is really handy so you know which face you're actually selected on. Now if you do alt+e on your keyboard, you'll bring up the texture palette. In 1.19 it has this really nice new separate interface from Dromed, and it has tiles that show what the textures look like, and it gives you information like the size of the texture. So Jorge or George is 32 by 32. You've also got a 256 and a 128 texture in here. Now if you click this drop down, it will show you all of the excuse me, it will show you all of the textures that you've loaded. Right now it only has water HW loaded, and then you can also set asterisk, which basically just sets it to show all textures within all of the texture families. So let's go ahead and load one so we can see some more textures. So I went to textures, add family, and I'm going to add the core_1 texture family. So now you'll see that it said added family, so it worked. Now I'll do alt+e again, and now I have more of a selection of textures. Now if you right click any of these, it will give you more options. And you can set how you want these textures to look in the texture palette, and you can sort them as well. Alright, so that was a little bit about the texture palette and the brushes. Now let's talk about some of the common tools that you will be using. So let's go up to Editors, and you'll see here Object Hierarchy, Edit Object, Texture Palette, Motion Editor, Mission Parameters, Game Sys Parameters, etc. So what you will most often use is Object Hierarchy, And because I have the Dromed toolkit installed, it comes with hotkeys for these different editors. So F5 is a quicker way to get to the object hierarchy. So I'll go ahead and just use that instead, F5. Now this is where you can select objects and bring them into the scene, into your brush. So let's go ahead and try placing an object. Let's go to Creature, Undead, Haunt, and then you'll click on Create. That will close that window. Let's go back to the 4 views. Now if you click and drag, it will create that object in the scene where the mouse was. Now there's one thing I have to do before I can actually show you what this looks like in game. So when you start this, basically the game does not, Dromed does not know where, Dromed cannot display to you what things look like. You have to do a process called portalize. And in order to portalize, you have to go to Tools and then select portalize. And basically what that does is that calculates all of the brushes in your scene and allows them to be shown whenever you go to solid plus selection or when you go into game mode. So you can see that I've now selected my object, now added this, and let me go ahead and move him to the floor. So there we go. Now we've got a haunt. Okay, let me go ahead and portalize now. That's just a noise to let you know that the portalization has finished. And that's something new in 1.19. Previously, you just have to wait until you saw at the bottom done in order to tell that it's been finished. But now you can go and, browse the internet or do whatever you need to do until the process has finished. Before we go any further, I'd like to talk about the mono develop screen. I did not mention this in the last tutorial, and it is very useful, and I feel like it's important to talk about. So let me bring up the mono screen now. So this is the mono dialog box, or the mono pop-up. This shows you information about what's going on in Dromed. So you'll see here that it portalized within 0 seconds. So it portalized really quick, and that's just because there's not that many brushes in this particular mission file right now. And it also will calculate lighting as well. But since there are no lights in this level, it shows 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. In addition, you can also look at information like what mission you've loaded, and information about lighting and what script modules have been loaded, like Gen and Convict. So I just thought I'd mention that because I feel like that's a important thing to use, and it will come in handy whenever you're building your level. So let's go back to Dromed now. Now that I've portalized, let's go ahead and change this to solid plus selection. Looks like that didn't work. Here's a quick lesson, and I messed up on this. The reason why you're not seeing anything is because I set this previously to a solid. This needs to be set as a fill air. So now let me re-portalize. There you go. Now you can see the haunt in the room here. Now because there are no lights, it's going to be extremely dark, but I can change that. Let's just turn on toggle lighting, so that way you can see what's going on without having to go in there and selecting and adding lights just yet. Now you can go to game mode, or you can use the hotkey alt+G to go into game. So let's go ahead and jump in and test this out. Okay, well, because I'm using Dromed within a little window, I won't be able to show you in game. But what that would have done is showed you what the game looks like with the haunt in there. Now, I did set up the health shields and the light gem, but what I did not set up is the inventory system for Garrett. So he will not spawn with anything in his inventory. No sword, no blackjack, no broadhead arrows. He doesn't have anything associated with him. In order to do that, you have to create those objects that you want, and then you have to link them to the starting point marker. So let's go ahead and try that. I will hit F5, and let's look for sword. There it is. Sword -236 is what you want. Click create. Now, you don't want this to be within your airbrush, and the reason why I say that is because the object will be shown in there, and you don't want a floating sword just sitting there. So you'll want to move the sword that you've created for Garrett outside of the brushes, outside of your airbrush. Now, here's the next step. Now, you can do this either way. You can select your starting point and hit links and create a contains link, or you can select the sword and do links. But if you do it from the sword, let me just show you real quick. You will have to check this little squiggly box here in order to make sure that it's from the Garrett starting point and to the sword. Alright, so let me do it from the starting point. So I'll go to links. You'll see I've got the player factory in there. Now let's click add, and I will add a contains link. And you just put in here in parentheses, or actually you don't even have to do that. You can just type in the number. So 1 is the object number, object ID for that particular sword. And you can see here that if you double click on that link, it gives you some extra data that you can modify. So we've got generic contents, belt, hand, alternate. We want to keep this to generic contents. Hit OK, and now we've set it up to where Garrett has a sword. Now, if you'll just bear with me, I'm going to test this real quick. Alright, that worked. So, and this is basically the kind of the process you'll go through. You'll want to go into game mode and test that things are working. So, now that we have that set, let's talk about edit object. So edit object, that's just another way of going to down here and clicking on properties. And you can also hit F6 on your keyboard to bring that same pop-up, bring that little dialog, or that little properties window up. And then of course we've got F7 for the texture palette. Okay, let's go ahead and jump into mission parameters. This is where you set up things like the dark mission description. So this is where you'd set up the name, the mission number for your mission, and the name of the actual mission. So you could set here 25 and then miss 25 if that's the name of your mission. Now the reason you want these to match up, and the reason why I use 25 is because in Thief 2 there are already 16 missions, and I just want to make sure that I don't use a number that's already been used. So I'll start with 25 for this mission. You've got other settings in here like how to set up the sky, and you can enable fog, and then you've got rendering parameters that will set up the sunlight system and the ambient light for your mission. And then you've got sky rendering mode that basically sets it to whether do you want your skybox to have an actual texture or do you want it to just have stars. Now most of the time in Thief they used textures, and that allows you to set custom backgrounds, so you have, like, you know, the city with the moon back there. Song parameters, that allows you to set a song name if you were using the Thief 2 song system. Then you've got watercolors, you can change the color of water, and then of course weather. And this interface allows you to set up the precipitation type, either snow or rain, and then it has all of the values in here like drops per second. You can set what texture you want to actually use for the precipitation that's falling. So here's the game sys variables. Okay, so let's get back to the tools now. So you're already familiar with portalize. You're probably wondering what optimize is. Optimize is a more in-depth calculation for your level, and it does more calculations than portalize. So you don't really want to use optimize that much, since it takes longer. Optimize you may only want to use like once you've done a lot of changes to your mission, like adding a lot of lights and brushes, and you just want to optimize the scene. The next thing is compute pathfinding database. This sets up how artificial intelligence will actually get around the brushes. So the AI won't know where to go, how to path your level, your mission, without calculating the pathfinding database. So first you need to do portalize, and then you want to do compute pathfinding. In addition to that, there's also build room database and AI room database. You'll use build room database for the room brushes, and that is the purple brushes that you put around an air or solid brush. Now you're probably wondering what a room brush is. Basically, a room brush allows you to set up sound for a room. Without a room brush, you won't hear anything in the room. And it also allows you to trigger events. So say you walk into a room with a room brush and it has a trig world script or something like that, then it will cause something to happen. The best example of that is in the Lost City mission from Thief 1, in which you'd walk into a room and these blue lights would turn on. That was because of a room brush. So basically they set it up to where when you walked in, the room brush had a script on it that was attached to the light and would turn it on. So you want to have room brushes around all of your airbrushes for any room that you're wanting the player to actually walk inside. So that's what build room database does. That just sets the the number, the room ID, and calculates all of the room brushes within the scene. And then you have AI room database. I'm not entirely sure what that does, to be honest, but I believe it has to do with setting how AI are set up within a room brush. So you'll want to, I guess, their properties and whatnot. So you'll want to make sure that you do that as well anytime you add new AI, and you'll want to do AI room database. So here we've got game mode. You can set in here, show stats. This is just little settings for the in-game mode. So show stats, that's just a nice way of showing like a bunch of information, like average frames per second, how many polygons are on screen. That's all while you're playing the game. And then you can go over here to game mode settings and set like the width, the resolution, width and height. So whatever resolution you want to play the game at, and whether you want it to be in full screen or not, and what bit depth. So I just leave this to 32, and I have mine set to 1600 by 900 because my monitor is native resolution is 1600 by 900. So here's view. This has toggle light, which you'll use most often. And now you can go into view and just click on it, or you can hit F3, or actually not F3, that's to find an object. You can go down to here and type in toggle underscore light. Actually, that's toggle underscore lighting. And that turns the light, the full bright setting back off. Of course, you don't want to keep light bright on if you're trying to actually see how the mission's going to look with your lights in place. Let's go ahead and add a light into the scene. So I will go to F3. Now I can bring up the object hierarchy, but in this case I know a specific thing that I'm looking for, so I'm going to type in lights, and that will bring me to the lights archetype within the hierarchy. Now I'll just hit this plus, and now I can look at all the different lights. Let's see. I will pick a standard torch. And now we've got some actual light in here. We'll go ahead and wall that object. That's a nice little handy new thing. Previously, whenever I'd use Dromed, I'd always manually use the little X, Y, and Z and try to get the torch to line up just right on the wall. But in this, I've got edit wall object, and it sets it already to the wall. So there we go. Now you can go in game and it will now have light, but the problem is that lighting is not calculated dynamically. What I mean is that the lighting has to be recalculated through tools. So you have to go to tools and click on light to actually calculate your lighting. So you can see that there is light in here, but since I've moved it, the light will still appear like it's over here and not over here, not over at the wall. So you'll see light illumination in the middle of the room rather than on the wall. So that's why you have to recalculate your lighting every time you move a light. Otherwise it will not update the lighting position. So let's go ahead and do light. There you go. And now you can see that there's a big bright illumination around the torch now. Now there's some additional settings that you will want to play with once you get accustomed to lighting, and that is quick lighting, raycast lighting, and object cast lighting. Object cast, I don't quite know the difference between these three, but object cast is the one that you'd really want to use when you're finalizing the level. But because lighting, at least on my system, does not take a long time to calculate, I just keep it at object cast lighting. But if you're wanting to just quickly see how light's going to look, then I'd use quick lighting, of course. Now, in Dromed 1.19, there is now this new setting for light maps. Now, all of the original missions used 16-bit, and that introduced the banding, the terrible shadowing. The way the shadows looked wasn't very nice, and you had this like rainbow effect in the lighting. Now, to remedy that, there's now the 32-bit light maps, and they're 32-bit 2x. So 32-bit 2x, from what I understand, is an overbright for the lights in your scene. For now, let's just stick with 32-bit lighting. That's what you'll want to use to get rid of the banding effect. But let's just test and see what it looks like with 16-bit. So I'm going to switch to 16-bit and redo the lighting. Now you can't really tell any difference because there's no textures or really any shadows to speak of within this scene. Oh, looks like this guy's not on the floor properly. There we go. So let me go ahead, and we haven't actually put any textures on this wall. So let's go ahead and select some textures to put on this wall. I'll use this one. So I double clicked it and it put it on that face, but I don't want to have to go and do each one individually, so I'll just go to default, alt+e. There we go, and now it's selected. The only problem with that is it also does the roof and the floor. So now let's go back to bottom, cycle through some floors. I'll use that for the floor. Let's go to the top. I'll use iron rock for the ceiling. So now that we've got that set up, that looks better. Instead of just having the Jorge, or the George. Sorry, I don't really know what to call it. I'll just call it George, I guess, from now on. But you know what I'm talking about. Okay, so now we've got that set up. Let's try 32-bit light maps again. So really, you're not really seeing any change. Let's make this room larger. So first I'm going to delete this default room by hitting delete on the keyboard, and I'm going to rescale this room. So pull this out some more, pull that over. Now if you want to re-add a room brush, there's an easier way to do it than just selecting a room brush and clicking and dragging. That's the hard way because you have to try to match it to the room. The easier way is to click on your airbrush and do Shift Insert, and that will put a room brush right around your airbrush. Only problem is it made it the exact same size. So I'll have to go in here and turn off all the use the filters. That doesn't seem to work for some reason. Ah, there we go. Turn on the terrain. Ah, it's because that's what I've got selected. That makes sense. Okay, so here we go. So I've selected a room brush, and I'm going to make it a little bit bigger since I couldn't select it through the terrain. Go ahead and turn everything back on. Ah, turns out I was actually selected on the terrain and not the airbrush, not the default room. So let me go ahead and scale this back down a little bit. Okay, there we go. Now I will notice it's still showing that everything's as if it had been portalized. So it shows you what you last portalized. It's not going to show you obviously the new changes until you reportalize. So I'll go ahead and do that. So now you can see that we've got a much larger room. Let's do wall object again. Alright, let me do compute pathfinding. Build the AI room, build the room database. And you see, here's my mono. You can see what it's doing. So it tells you all the information about the rooms. So I've got 2 rooms that were calculated. Okay, now I need to redo the lighting. Okay, so this is really not showing off how I had expected. But if you change between 16-bit and 32-bit light maps, you would see a difference. You should see a difference, I should say. Why don't I open up let's open up something different here. You'll see it's loaded these script modules, and it shows that this mission was built with 16-bit light maps. Alright. Try to find an area that you can see the difference in the lighting. Okay, so here's a good room with some shadows. Let's switch it to 32-bit light maps and redo the lighting. Now this is going to take a little bit longer because this is a fully built mission with a bunch of lights already in it. There we go. So now we are in 32-bit lighting. Now you may or may not have noticed there was some green, sort of green lighting on the shadowing here. Now that's gone. Let's just go back to 16-bit again and try it. See what I'm talking about? So now you've got this green light here, which does not show up when you're in 32-bit. Now that's not really an extreme example. A good example, which you probably saw if you watched the first video, was the ambush level. That had a lot of rainbowing effect with the lighting in that one. So when I switched it to 32-bit, you could tell that shadowing and lighting looked much better. So that concludes my second video. I hope it was helpful, and I apologize for the length. I'm still new to this, but I hope it was useful. So thanks for tuning in. Until next time.